The dark side of American history made me this way. I don't care what nobody says. America is not a racist country. Warning, graphic content. The following images and or content may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The United States of America has never been united. It's always been divided. Negroes were labeled as property. Slavery. Here's a picture of a slave ship. Plan of lower deck with the storage of 292 slaves. Storage of 130 additional slaves around the wings or sides of the lower deck. A shackle slave and his master. Flogging a slave fastened to the ground. Slaves on the plantation picking cotton. Here's some posters right here. Negroes for sale by public auction. That was Thursday, 10 a.m. the 12th of April, 1848. Prime and healthy at O'Donnell's auction house in Charleston, South Carolina. Great sale of slaves. That was January 10th, 1855. Valuable gang of young Negroes. That was in New Orleans, March 24th, 1840. $1,200 to $1,250 for Negroes. $100 reward for runaway slave. $150 reward for Tom. He was about 30 years of age, 5'6" or 7. Dark, heavy in the chest, several of his teeth out. Tom took a few clothes and several hats with him. Plantation police, runaway slave patrol. Picture some badges right here. Runaway slave patrol badge. Store right here, auction and Negro sales. December the 18th, 1865, the 13th Amendment was adopted as part of the United States Constitution. The amendment officially abolished slavery and immediately freed more than 100,000 enslaved people from Kentucky to Delaware. The language used in the 13th Amendment was taken from the 1787 Northwest Ordinance. The Jim Crow era. Some examples of Jim Crow laws. A black male could not shake hands with a white male because it implied social equality. Blacks and whites could not eat together. White motorists had the right of way at all times. A black person could not even suggest that a white person was lying. Schools were separate, as were restaurants, water fountains, restrooms, and even parks. Cruel justice such as lynching was necessary because blacks were thought to be prone to violence. Segregation. Some examples: separate bathrooms, drinking fountains, schools, jails, transportation, bus, train, planes. Military. Separate graveyards. Sports such as baseball, parks, theaters, housing. Voting. To be able to vote in Oregon, you had to read the Constitution and write your name. In 1956, he traveled to South Carolina's segregated beaches to take pictures for Jet magazine. A friend of his took this picture of him on the way back. What does this picture tell you about Cecil Williams? He didn't give a damn. Imperial Laundry Company. We wash for white people only. We serve whites only. No Spanish or Mexicans. Just want to talk about the year 1865, which is very interesting. In 1865, slavery was abolished. Also in 1865, that was the year and the start of the Jim Crow era. Also in 1865, the form of the Ku Klux Klan, better known as the KKK. So you think about it. Slavery was abolished in 1865, and then the Jim Crow era, which was laws that were in place for black people, Negroes. So they got the KKK started. So it's like, if we can't get you one way, we're going to get you another way. That's what it's like. You ended slavery, so we're going to make it hard for black folks. We're going to make their lives a living hell. Jim Crow laws were a collection of state and local statutes that legalized racial segregation, named after a black minstrel show character, The Laws, which existed for about 100 years from the post-Civil War era until 1968, were meant to marginalize African Americans by denying them the right to vote, hold jobs, get an education, or other opportunities. Those who attempt to defy Jim Crow laws often face arrest, fines, jail sentences, violence, and death. Black codes. The roots of Jim Crow laws began as early as 1865, immediately following the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in the United States. Black codes were strict local and state laws that detail when, where, and how formerly enslaved people could work and for how much compensation. The codes appeared throughout the South as a legal way to put black citizens into indentured servitude, to take voting rights away, to control where they live and how they travel, and to seize children for labor purposes. These codes work in conjunction with labor camps incarcerated where prisoners were treated as enslaved people. Black offenders typically received longer sentences than their white equals, and because of the grueling work, often did not live out their entire sentence. The legal system was stacked against black citizens, with former Confederate soldiers working as police and judges, making it difficult for African Americans to win court cases and ensuring they were subject to black codes. The most ruthless organization of the Jim Crow era, the Ku Klux Klan, was born in 1865 in Pulaski, Tennessee, as a private club for the Confederate veterans. The KKK grew into a secret society, terrorizing black communities and seeping through white Southern culture, with the members at the highest level of government and in the lowest echelons of criminal back alleys.
It's definitely a necessity for us to live in the United States of America and do so and do it safely.
As the popularity of the Green Book grew and hotels refused to provide lodging for Black people, more families began to open their homes to guests. And while there may have been men in the homes, it was the women's names who were listed in the Green Book.
Green Book sites were scarce, so-called sundown towns were plentiful.
You'd see a sign on the way in.
What would it say?
N-word. Don't let the sun set on you here. You could have a green book, but you could still find yourself in a sundown town at the wrong time, and sometimes you'd be escorted out of town by law enforcement. Sometimes you'd be harassed or chased or worse.
Black babies were used as alligator bait. Alligator bait. Alligator hunting was very profitable in the 1800s through 1900s. The skins were used to make shoes, bags, belts, and other items. However, white hunters often lost their arms and sometimes their lives as they wrestled the swampy waters at night, attempting to attract alligators to the surface. So they decided to use slave babies as bait. This horrendous act was later characterized in sheet music, postcards, and figurines. Years later, a candy manufacturer of black licorice drops created a distasteful advertisement that featured a hungry-looking alligator leering at a bug-eyed black baby. The ad read, "A dainty little morsel." For decades, the popular candy was referred to as nigger babies with the ER. The name was later changed to Nibs, Nibs, and is still on the market today. Not surprised. Lynching postcards. A lynching postcard is a postcard bearing the photograph of a lynching, a vigilante murder usually motivated by racial hatred, intended to be distributed, collected, or kept as a souvenir. Often a lynching postcard would be inscribed with racist text or poems. Lynching postcards were in widespread production for more than 50 years in the United States, although their distribution through the United States Postal Service was banned in 1908. This is where they lynched a Negro the other day. They don't know who done it. I guess they don't care much. I don't. Do you? The Tuskegee syphilis experiment.
They were told they'd get treated for their bad blood. Instead, hundreds of poor black men became participants unknowingly in a shocking and truly shameful chapter of American medical history. In 1932, the United States Public Health Service launched an unethical research project to examine the effects of untreated syphilis. The project was called the Tuskegee Study because it recruited 600 black men living in Tuskegee, Alabama. Researchers told the men that they were being treated for bad blood, a term used locally to describe anything from fatigue to anemia. They promised the men free medical treatment if they participated. While 2/3 of the men in the study were confirmed to have syphilis, not one received proper treatment for the disease they had contracted.
So this was a study in which there was no consent on the part of those who were being studied, also deception on the part of the U.S. government.
When penicillin became the recommended treatment for syphilis in the 1940s, Tuskegee researchers scandalously withheld the drug from the men in the study so that they could continue to chart the course of the disease when untreated. Many patients experienced damage to their vital organs and nervous systems, and for some, the lack of treatment led to death.
Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. On this day in 1921, at least 300 people died in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in one of the worst racial attacks in American history, known as the Black Wall Street Massacre. The worst race riot in U.S. history happened in Tulsa in 1921, when angry white mobs destroyed America's wealthiest black community and killed 300. The first bombs that ever fell on America fell on Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
The last three survivors entered court for what could be a last effort to force the city of Tulsa to pay reparations for a 1921 massacre that killed an estimated 300 black residents.
We know what happened 100 years ago, and it is time for the city of Tulsa to do what's right and stand on the right side of history.
The survivors, Viola Fletcher, Leslie Benningfield Randall, and Hughes Van Ellis, are all more than 100 years old. They were small children living in the Greenwood section of town known as Black Wall Street, a thriving black community in the middle of the Jim Crow era. In 1921, a young black man was accused of assaulting a white teenage girl. A white mob, including members of the Tulsa Sheriff's Department, torched roughly 35 blocks of homes and businesses, nearly wiping out the city's black residents.
The night of the massacre, I was awakened by my family.
Now 107, Viola Fletcher saw her community torn apart by that white mob.
Well, I think about it every day. I think it'll be something I'll never forget.
No one was ever held accountable for what happened that day, and the lawsuit alleges that the defendants' exploitation of death, destruction, and disparities they created have resulted in their unjust enrichment at the expense of these communities. The city is arguing it should not be forced to pay anything because today's residents had nothing to do with what happened more than a century ago.
We should have paid them people something that happened over 100 years ago. I ain't pay them people. Them people, 3 survivors left. It's only 3 survivors left from the Tulsa Race Massacre. 3. You can't give them reparations? These people won't even get a chance to enjoy this money. All 3 of them are in wheelchairs, over 100 years old. They've been fighting for reparations for something this government caused. This government took part in. Police officers. Bombed businesses, killed a lot of people. Over 600 people injured. Over 300 deaths. And you mean to tell me there's 3 survivors left and they can't give them reparations that they caused? This government is wicked. This country is horrible. You know, it's sad and it's hard being a black person. I really hate using the word black because I think you already know how I feel about that. I don't like being called black because I'm brown. But it's sad. This wasn't about no black man assaulting no white woman on an elevator. It was about jealousy. About jealousy. Black Wall Street. Those people had it going on. So they destroyed it. This government. This country that we call the United States of America. It's sad how black people are treated in this country. Long before then, and even to this day.
A proposal to change the way slavery is taught to second graders in Texas, and it's facing some backlash. Under this proposed standard, slavery would be now described as involuntary relocation. Our Roseanne Aragon is live outside HISD headquarters with a closer look at the controversial proposal. Roseanne?
Yes, we are here outside HISD, but there are nearly 8,900 public schools in Texas. Local community leaders were very disappointed in the proposed draft of Texas second grade social studies standards laid out by a group of educators. But the state board maintains their curriculum will not downplay the role of slavery in American history. Community leaders reacting after a now controversial draft of second grade social studies standards, which a working group recently presented to the Texas State Board of Education for review. The draft included a section titled Enslaved Peoples in America, and the description in the draft included the language involuntary relocation instead of slavery.
What kind of educators are these who think that slavery is the same thing as involuntary relocation? And then my thoughts went to here as another attempt to whitewash the truth about history.
Juneteenth is a federal holiday in the United States commemorating the emancipation of enslaved African Americans. Juneteenth marks the anniversary of the announcement of General Order No. 3 by Union Army General Gordon Granger on June 19, 1865, proclaiming freedom for enslaved people in Texas. They're trying to change the word slavery to involuntary relocation, just like a few years ago when they changed the word slaves to migrant workers. Black Americans are still the most hated, targeted, brutalized, victimized, and discriminated group of people in the United States. So we supposed to believe that the United States now care about little black babies? You said abortion is murder? This was murder. Uncle Tom. Historically, Uncle Tom was a black man born into slavery who ended up sacrificing his own life to save the lives of other slaves. But when this story was made into a movie, Uncle Tom was portrayed as a slave who gave his life for his master. Cow in Uncle Tom is a derogatory term to describe a black man who acts white and talks white, or who is a sellout to his own race. A black man who kisses white people's asses, and who would turn his back on other black people to keep the approval of whites. A sellout, an ass kisser, a race traitor. Sambo. Sambo is a character from the book Uncle Tom's Cabin. Sambo was a slave whose characteristics were to turn against his own people and sell out to the slave owner. This character's sellout attributes are largely placed on the wrong character, Uncle Tom. Now in this post right here, you can see the difference between a Sambo and an Uncle Tom. Who's the sellout? Uncle Tom was the good guy. Sambo was the sellout. America needs to stop trying to hide this evil dark side of history that they've created. And let's not forget the most ignored race of people in America when it comes to this man right here and his administration. The Black Panther Party. What problems did the Black Panther Party face? Its members confronted politicians, challenged the police, and protected black citizens from brutality. The party's community service programs, called survival programs, provided food, clothing, and transportation. Rather than integrating American society, members wanted to change it fundamentally. They dismantled, jailed, and assassinated members of the Black Panther Party. But they never bothered the KKK. we know why.